just wait for it to. Okay, great. All right. So I'm just going to give a short introduction, and then I will hand over to Lesley and Katherine. So welcome to our third event in the In Conversation series, as we're calling it. I'm Naomi Smith, one of the student leaders in the Students' Union. I just wanted to kick us off with just a few words about the series before I hand over to Lesley and Kat for the main event. This series was originally conceived with the idea of setting up public conversations in general as a way to explore the research we do here in a more dynamic way than we might otherwise in a typical lecture. These events so far have been an absolute joy to organise and to watch, and I have no doubt that tonight will be similarly wonderful. We're going to hear from Dr. Lesley McFadyen and Dr. Katherine Hill, two of Birkbeck's archaeology and history lecturers tonight, who will be talking about their current projects and how they connect with each other. Both of them have been looking at landscape, environment, and community in Scotland. Lesley's been working on prehistory, ecosystems, and heritage, while Kat's been looking at the history of mountain bothy culture. And in particular, both examine intersecting relationships between past people and place. With that, I'm going to hand over to you both. Again, thank you so much for coming and giving your time to us this evening.
Thank you so much, Naomi. Yeah. And it's also really nice to be able to talk to Kat and to be able to, well, hopefully talk to all of you as well, because we're really looking forward to a conversation. We've got two key topics really that we want to discuss this evening. And so I'm going to introduce the first one, which is we want to talk about how dividing out cultural and natural landscapes is really problematic and that we mustn't do this. And we want to talk a little bit about how we've been trying to do that in our own work. So I'm going to start very quickly. And I'm going to talk about a project that I've been invited to join. Well, I was invited in February 2020 and haven't really got started yet because of COVID, but it's called Dead Isle and it's by the photographer Alex Boyd. And Alex has been working on the Ardair Peninsula on the mainland of North Ayrshire in Scotland. And I was really interested in joining also because it's an area that I used to explore as a teenager. I shouldn't have been on that land, but when we were doing day trips to Irvine Beach and the leisure centre, we used to go off onto the sand dunes because it's also the site, or it is the site of an explosive manufacturing plant that was built by Alfred Noble in 1873. And the reason it's situated there is because of the sand dune system. And they built the huts into the dune system to contain explosives. It was also a developed town with a railway, and it was munitionettes that worked there, women during both world wars. The part of the project that I'm really doing with Alex is we're working together on women's graffiti of the hut walls. But it's not that I want to talk about really. In going through, Alex has been photographing the site for 10 years. And in going through them, it made me realise from having grown up there and how no one visits this area, how to go about approaching this landscape. And the first thing I kind of want to emphasise really about it is that there's lots, it's busy with archaeology. There's evidence for prehistoric settlement and monuments, for historic farms, for ironworks and coal pits. So it's really, really busy. And then there's the munitions factory. So it's really, really busy with archaeology, but everybody ignores it. Why is that? The other thing is that because of the presence of that manufacturing plant and its danger, access was very controlled by the workers, for the workers, and you could only go to certain places at certain times during its operation, and even after its abandonment, it's all fenced off. So that kind of controlled presencing of people, along with the complex dune system, means that it's actually also a site of ecological importance. It's got a really important bees, wasps and beetles populations, and moths and birds. So ecologically, it's really, really busy too, but it's ignored. I want to show you, here I go with the screen, Kat. I want to show you one particular photograph of Alex Boyd's to show you why it's ignored and overlooked, and kind of draw out this tension. Let me see. Kat, will you shout if it works or not?
Yeah, that's working.
Can you see just that one image?
I can see the whole PowerPoint at the moment.
Hang on, so I need to go to view. That better or what?
Now we can see like the presentation view.
Let's just leave it there.
Yeah.
Let's look at this. Let's look at this particular photograph here of Alex's. And I want to talk about why this has struck me so much as being important, and why it's stuck with me as we've been trying to start work on this project. It's graffiti of a painting of Robert Burns. Robert Burns is the national poet of Scotland. He was born and lived in for most of his life in Ayrshire, which is where the Ardeer Peninsula is. But this, it's of a painting of Robert Burns, this graffiti. And this is a painting that was made by Alexander Naismith, and it's in the Scottish National Portrait Gallery. So it's Robert Burns, who's really famous to Ayrshire and Scotland nationally. It's also a painting that's really, really famous. It's a rural landscape that you can see in the background, but it's located on the seawall that was built to contain the dune system. And you can see the perimeter fence of the munitions site and the keep out signs. And I kept looking, I still do, I keep looking at this photograph because it makes me think about how Ayrshire, North Ayrshire in particular, which includes Arran, how normally popular tourist photographs are on the islands rather than the mainland. And they're of the mountains and the sea filling the frame. They're of natural beauty, of the elemental, and they're devoid of occupation. So is the Ardeer Peninsula always ignored because it's working landscapes? When you see, like in the painting, this rural landscape, and when you see photographs of Ayrshire, it is of these rural landscapes in terms of the pastoral or of country house estates. It's never of working landscapes, and it's never recognizing that these elemental landscapes are working landscapes too. So I was thinking about why that is, and this photograph in particular, what I really like about it is it kind of creates a chance, a discursive frame for me to talk about what matter gets overlooked normally or is actively ignored. Because these landscapes matter. They matter archaeologically and they matter ecologically. And it's the friction, the tension that is important.
Thanks, Leslie. Yeah, I think this. Oh, yeah, yeah. You stopped sharing. Fantastic. Yeah. I'll get it
when you're ready.
I will do. It's so exciting to hear Leslie talk about this, because this is, I think, both of us have come quite a long way in thinking about different ways in which we're going to use our work, which is something we're going to touch on later. But there's so many interesting intersections of things that we've come to work on about these questions about place and the use of landscape and the framing of landscape through pasts and kind of and then also kind of present use. And I've started to think about this in relation to, as Naomi said, mountain bothy culture, which is something that is very new for me to work on. I am an early modernist normally, and I've worked on religious culture and cultural history, but having gone to some bothy, spent some time in these huts, I'm going to say a little bit about their history in a moment. It's maybe really think about some of these similar questions about the way it was just this kind of intersection between the way that people use landscape, in particular outdoors activity, and frame places, and how that kind of connects with ideas about environmentalism and environmental activism. So, I mean, bothies, for those of you who don't know, are simple huts. We don't necessarily know exactly where the word comes from. It's possibly a kind of corruption of a vernacular word for hut. And the original kind of meaning of bothy, if you go back to the 19th century, is that these are cottages for estate workers and for people who are working the land. And then with the Highland clearances and changing land use, these are abandoned. But these buildings, along with other kind of like mountainside shelters, like old droving cottages, have been reclaimed as places of refuge for kind of walking culture. So this idea of a wilderness hut, if you're out in the environment, and somewhere you can stay for free for the night, and the kind of there are official and unofficial bothies. The kind of official bothies are coordinated by an organisation called the MBA, the Mountain Bothies Association, which from the kind of from the 1960s, 1965, it was formed, built on a kind of informal culture which grew up after this, the First World War, of people kind of taking to the mountains and then using these as shelter. So now there are over 100 bothies which are maintained by the MBA, which are free to use, and this kind of fit into this kind of culture of walking and a fellowship and of being outdoors. And most of them are in Scotland, but there are some in England, there are some in Wales, and you get kind of versions of a similar type of thing in wilderness huts in Scandinavia and in Germany. So the bothies are perhaps the kind of the most famous. And I guess some of the things that this has made me think about connecting with Leslie's work is that these are also in landscapes which seem to evoke this kind of elemental wilderness. This, although you've got a building here, it's this building in this kind of place of impressive mountains and lochs and this kind of sense of being in the wild and touching nature, but also actually when you look into the past, they've got many layered pasts and this idea of kind of going out into the wild. So one bothy, the first bothy I visited, actually Cadley, which I've been working on, which is on Loch Etive. It's got this kind of very rich and tangled history. It appears as possibly a place of refuge for the mythical lovers in the Ulster cycle. Deirdre, that's possibly where the name comes from. There's the history of, it was a farming settlement. It was actually quite a popular tourist site in the 19th century because there was the ferry that went over from Loch Etive, and Dorothy and William Wordsworth kind of wandered around, unsurprisingly, kind of the typical romantic landscape. But then there's also still a big kind of working quarry at one end of the site there, and one of the mountains in the range just at the head of Loch Etive is the Hollow Mountain. It's actually there's still a kind of working quarry mine there. So this kind of key question of these types of landscape and how people use them, and whether bothying, this kind of going out to visit these places, connects people with landscape in ways which promote kind of an environmental ethic, like a land ethic, and what being out in nature and imagining in nature in particular ways means. Because of course, one of the things that, if you're going to the bothy, there's no running water, there's no electricity, you take stuff with you, and the code is, you don't do damage to the place. Does it promote an idea of the kind of simple good life, about low footprints, about kind of environmental sustainable living? And there's some really kind of interesting ways it plays with those ideas. And I'll just show, if you could just show me the image. Thanks, Leslie. Yes, okay, so this is one bothy that I visited fairly recently. This is Green Sykes, which is one of the more accessible bothies because you have to walk to them. Sometimes you can bike, but this is a fairly short walk. It's only about an hour to get there. So this is kind of southern, it's just over the border, so southern Scotland. And this is what we might call kind of a luxury bothy in terms of like MBA luxury bothies. There are like luxury bothies, which are holiday retreats, and it's kind of luxury because it's got a composting toilet, which is not normally what you would have at a bothy. Normally just dig. And so I just found this interesting because it's what is kind of the luxury in the bothy outside of the context of that world of retreat is like an idea of like simple, low impact, sustainable living. You wouldn't necessarily say that was luxury living outside the context of the bothy. So there's interesting debates about, does it promote with this kind of retreat from modernity or modern values an environmentally friendly way of living? But then there's also the problematic side and some of these things that Leslie was touching on, that that there's this concern with kind of storing the landscape or telling the narrative of the landscape in a particular way, which also goes with the bothies. And I'm going to show you in the second part of the talk, actually, one of the slides, which is a record from the bothy books, through the books that people sign when they go into the bothy, and some date back as far as the 1920s. So people are telling kind of narratives of themselves within this landscape, and you often do get this language of kind of retreat, of refuge, being part of a community, but a community which is seeing this kind of space in the wild, perhaps as a retreat from nature, a retreat into nature. There's lots of really interesting snippets of environmental literature and poetry that appear all over the bothy books. You get T.S. Eliot, you get Robert Burns, you get Gary Snyder. All sorts of things are quoted back in this bothy books, kind of sharing of knowledge. But there's also this kind of problem of seeing only kind of separating this retreat from the wild, and what does that do? You go back to your kind of modern life, your other life, when you've been in the space of the bothy. And the kind of the third way I think this raises interesting ideas about connections with environmentalism and use of landscape is that these are increasingly popular, and we all saw kind of with COVID, those pictures of beauty spots being overused. I mean, who could blame people for going out into nature when they were cooped up for so long? And there's this kind of similarity, but then this was critiqued, this similarity of this debate of people overusing space, and yet we need space, and we need space in nature. So balancing kind of these ideas of human use, the need to protect places, and how some of the ways we might frame our separation, the cultural landscape and the natural landscape, as Leslie says, that's the problematic thing, because we're separating these places out, and saying there's this kind of separate place for nature, and sometimes we go into it for a retreat, and but that's not actually how these landscapes work, or what their pasts reveal about their use. So yeah, that's the kind of that's some of the stuff that I had to say about the environmentalism, and I say it's really exciting to see how it intersects with Leslie's stuff on prehistory as well.
Does anyone have any questions? Because we can carry on, yeah, for ages. But does anyone else have any questions? Or would you like to see some work on Aaron?
all the Arran stuff.
So our second topic, if you like, is yes, we're looking at these cultural and natural landscapes in a more integrated way, but we're also in this new research changing how we do and how we write these archaeological and historical projects, and I just want to talk a little bit about that. So after me saying everybody takes photographs of Arran rather than the mainland of North Ayrshire, I want to talk about a project that I was invited to join last year with Gavin McGregor and Kenny Brophy and David Bennett, called Awakening Sleeping Giant on Arran itself. And I'm just going to, I realise all our images are of sunshine, which is obviously what it's like all the time in Scotland. So just to situate you to begin with, you can see Arran's here, and it's basically that the Ardare Peninsula overlooks the island, and we're working on the eastern side of the island at Blackwater Foot at Drumadoon Farm. And last summer, there's a Neolithic cursus here. Cursus monument is a series of parallel banks. It's basically like a landscape architecture that connects up previous textures, and it's all about movement through the landscape. And we excavated a slot through the Neolithic cursus to check that it was Neolithic last summer. But we're trying to connect, again this is about connecting the ecological and the archaeological and in heritage work, really. Again, it's important to say that yes, we are concentrating on the Neolithic at the moment. I mean, Kenny, Gavin and I are prehistorians, but it's busy. It's busy with Bronze Age hut circles that are to the north and overlie part of the Cursus monument. There's the Iron Age hill fort of Drum of Doon. The King's Caves has got multi-period rock art in it, and it's famously the mythical story of where Robert the Bruce went to think again, where he met the spider. There's also the story of the farm itself, Drum of Doon. There's a series of enclosures. There were turf dyke enclosures that then became stone enclosures. And these are from the late 18th to early 19th century. And these are about the lotting of the land into large farms. And they're about the restriction of hill grazing. And this was done by John Burrell, and Drumadoon Farm was one of the first ones to be created. And it's also tied up with the clearance of the Arran inhabitants to make these large farms. So this busy and complicated texture all has to be considered. Also, Drumadoon itself, it's farmland. Why can't that picture be displayed? Hang on. Oh no, can you not see that one, Kat?
No, it's not. It shows on the mini view, but it doesn't show on the large view.
Okay. Well, anyway, Drumadoon Farm itself it's farmland. It's coastal cliffs and shorelines. Actually, I'm going to show you MacFadyen so that you can see, because MacFadyen is just to the north of it, and we're hoping to extend work into MacFadyen this year. But it's farmland, it's coastal cliffs and shorelines, it's scrub, it's woodlands, and it's heather moor. And at Drumadoon, you've got seals, otters, dolphins, basking sharks, seabirds that nest on the coastal cliffs. You've got red deer and short-eared owls and buzzards and kestrels and hen harriers in the scrub woodlands and heather moor. And you've got the barn owls and the farm buildings themselves. So it's important to talk about all of these textures archaeologically through time and in terms of different kinds of ecologies. And ask the question, who is this I'm going to stop showing for a minute. Ask the key question, who is this archaeology for? And what are the ways it can change so that it's for everyone? How can we get more people involved in it? So what we've been doing is we've been linking up rewilding, the farmer David's project, with the archaeology, with the geological heritage, with Arran Geopark, to create a kind of regenerative tourism. Also, the Arran Arts Heritage Trail has a point at Blackwater Foot with the artist Mary Armour. And it's really important to cross-cut and make these connections, or the projects will fail and they won't bring this kind of regenerative tourism along, because I don't know how to edit this or be polite about it. My family live on Arran. Tourism is a good thing and a bad thing. The island has lost. So, for example, Drumadoon Farm, it failed as a working farm because it had this portion of so much coastal and moorland to it. And David's taken over to try and work in a different way. But the dairy's gone. Lots and lots of agriculture and dairying and cows have gone. Tourism is intensified from April through to September, where people come onto the island and then they lose their jobs. All of the best kind of things seem to be disappearing, like the cheese making and the fish restaurants and things like that. So we need this kind of connecting up of things to produce another kind of tourism that's sustainable, and that is sustainable environmentally, and where archaeology plays a part of it. The other thing is the question of who comes to the island, and who's interested in archaeology. So when this is very much the work of Gavin McGregor and Kenny Brophy. When we were starting on the project, Digit became involved. And Digit is a hub for Scottish archaeology, particularly for young people to have a chance to learn about archaeology and how they can be involved and be a part of it. But also Gavin reached out to Jambo Radio. This Jambo Radio is a radio station for people of African and Caribbean heritage in Scotland. And to get people over to the island who don't come, and to say, is this interesting? How can we get you involved? And how can we change our practice so that you are involved in it? And if you're interested in this, University of Glasgow, their Archaeology Society, the next talk, which is next week, is going to be a debate where Digit and Jambo Radio are involved to talk about getting other people involved in archaeology and doing it in different ways. And Kenny will chair that. But what I've been trying to do on the island at MacFadyen Moor, which is where we're going to work next, is to set up a field walking project that initially offers training in the identification of worked stone, and if we're ever lucky, the identification of prehistoric pottery, but that is co-run with the local community and is actually taken over by the local community, because field walking needs to happen at particular times, and it needs to happen over and over again at scale. So if it's run by local groups, and they're trained, and then they present and talk and archive that archaeology, I see that as an initiative that I'd be proud of to be a part of. Certainly my mum started to get bored with it when all the neighbours have talked about being involved. But this is inspired, that it already exists. Mesolithic D-side run this. And so I was talking to Ali Cameron and Sheila Duthie about how they set it up and how they keep the momentum going. And so hopefully taking that over to Arran to work in that way, because this archaeology, not only does it have to connect to environment in a different way for a kind of regenerative tourism, it has to mean things to people, inhabitants on the island, and to those who never think an island is a place to visit. And maybe art and archaeology, well, Gavin thinks so, is one of the key ways in there. But I'll stop now and let Kat chat.
Thanks, Leslie. Actually, could you share the slide, and then I'll see if went on to the one after that. I mean, there's a lot of what Leslie said, which I'm going to talk about in a moment, which connects not necessarily with work I'm actively doing myself yet, but kind of ways in which I think this project could touches on really interesting issues that Leslie's mentioned about kind of ecotourism and rewilding, and the way in which, like, hopefully what I'm doing would intersect with kind of future connections. I mean, the first thing I wanted to say about this kind of way about doing things differently, and I think we were both thinking about how this work speaks to different audiences, gets different people involved. I am a historian, but thinking about how I might do things a little bit differently. I mean, as a historian, I go to the archives, that's kind of my started off, and I just wanted to show you some of the kind of archival stuff that I found, but then also why I want to write this project in a slightly different way. So these are some of these examples from what they mentioned, the bothy books. So these visitor books that people write in when they go to bothies, as you can see, this kind of imagining themselves in place, like drawing the bothy and the scenery and the kind of community, the socks hanging over the fire, and so this is great. This is a wonderful kind of archival material source, and not to say that when I've written projects before, I haven't gone places, but I wanted to write this project in a different way and experiment with, rather than just writing a standard academic book or kind of what I would have thought as coming out with the PhD project, something which is kind of more creative non-fiction, is based on my experience of going to the bothies and my experience in place. And I'm speaking as someone as well who has come to this fairly recently, which makes me kind of an interloper perhaps in this culture, which I think is itself an interesting perspective, kind of thinking about these questions of who's using these spaces and why and how we might use them, because there are lots of people who've done bothying for a long time, kind of life members of the MBA, though I have now joined the MBA, and thinking about if I'm going on trips to bothies or helping on a volunteer work party, I might go down to Wales in April to one of the bothies there, and actually kind of doing some kind of physical help restoring the bothies because they're maintained by volunteers. It's kind of blurring the lines between me as academic observer, but also participant in this culture, and then writing the book in a way which hopefully will reach a slightly different audience, that it's a different type of writing. I'm obviously by no means the first person to do any of that type of writing. That's the point, it's engaging in a different genre. experience, but hopefully to get people to think about these issues of the kind of use and place and environment. And that also then connects with a lot of what Lesley was saying about the way in which, I mean, why I find this interesting, why it kind of spoke to me, and what the potential and some of the problems are of this kind of examples of bothies. I mean, the word bothy now means something very different from what it did back in the 19th century. I mean, these are not anymore, these are not lived in farming cottages. The bothy is a kind of byword for wilderness adventure, wilderness culture. And now the term bothy itself is becoming something different, and there are problems and there are advantages to that, because it's got a place now in a kind of version of tourism, ecotourism, off the grid living. So as I mentioned, bothies themselves, like the traditional like MBA bothy, is much more popular than it used to be, and the problems that brings with people coming to place. But the way in which the idea of the bothy and things it could represent is being used in different creative projects, and projects which are trying to connect community, think about ecology, think about creative connections and community and place. And so if you could just share the next one for me, Lesley, that would be great. So this is not my project at all. I'm not, I didn't set this up, but I thought it was an interesting use of the way in which the term bothy and the things that it symbolizes is being used in a new way to create new types of connections. So this is a kind of digital and virtual project, although with real events set up recently at the University of Glasgow, the Dear Green Bothy, as it says, hosting creative and critical responses to climate emergency. So with COP26 and that being in Glasgow, kind of using a virtual bothy space to represent a community where people could come together and talk about issues of climate, of environment. And I think it's that idea that the bothy represents, yes, somewhere in nature, but it's a kind of a particular place of community, the way in which it builds connections and provides a space for storytelling, for thinking about connections between place and people. And so I think that's a kind of a really interesting project, and there are some similar kind of events that have been run, which some of the things that Lesley was talking about, kind of walking in space and thinking about people's connection with space and pasts. And then another way in which kind of the bothy has become reused is a more famous and more well-established project called the Bothy Project, which provides creative residencies and is based off kind of the architecture of like small spaces. So the bothies that the Bothy Project has are not old buildings; they're modern kind of architectural design of like a small space, and they have these spaces for creative residencies. One which hopefully I'm going to go to on Egg, Sweeney's Bothy, which has been designed and built. So half the year they're rentable as tourism spaces, and then half the year they're available for various types of creative residencies for practitioners, for artists, for people who are thinking about connections between land and place. And there've been criticisms of that it's it's not bothy culture because you're paying for it, and it's like separating the artist. Maybe it's quite elitist, and it's not really in the spirit of like walking in bothies. But at the same time, last year they are trying to do some of those things of working in place. So I mean, Egg is an interesting example because it's an island which is is community owned. So this idea of using the space for the community, and that the projects that come out of people doing residency should be designed to stimulate the local community. If I just find the text from their website, so they said beginning in 2021, the bothies will operate as sentinels of communication with the best experience and learning generated by residents shared widely through a new public programme. So how exactly that will work, but the idea of trying to connect people. And then that also goes with this idea of using the bothy as a space to think about conservation and people's place in nature as well. Trees for Life, the big project that Glen Affric, very famous and has its kind of own estate, has got a bothy there now where you can go as if you're kind of a group for an experience on a place that's being rewilded, and that the rewilding is interesting because it then will change what people's perception is of the romantic landscape that the bothy sits in. Because if you think of Cairngorms and the kind of those mountainscapes, if you then put trees back on them, it changes what people think as the dramatic landscape. So there's all these tensions about what to do and how to engage the right people, and that's why I found this so interesting about who it speaks to, because it's not just it's not just about going to look at things in the archives. So it's not sure exactly where it's going to end up, but it's quite exciting to do it and to think about it in new ways. So yeah, that's what I had to say about that.
It's good that we get to chat about this for the first time. We've hardly ever been in our offices. We've been on research time at different times, so we haven't physically been together. But it's also nice to share the start of that conversation with others. Can anyone help us? Does anyone else want to chat with us?
Yeah, anyone got any questions or suggestions or criticisms or?
Hey, great to see the two of you together. Two of my favorite people. Congrats.
It's lovely to see you.
Yeah, nice to see you.
Yeah, ditto. Congrats on the new work. Hey, as you were talking, it sort of started to raise some questions in my mind, at least, in thinking about that separation and maybe even overlap of purpose in these settings, and what that might have meant to things like identity and relationship with the land for those who lived in it over time, and then sort of what that looks like through commonalities, and perhaps more interestingly uncommonalities. Is that a word? Uncommonality? Uncommon connections, let's say that might have developed over time in these sort of really discrete, but now, as you brought together, overlapping environments.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question about the kind of different, the tensions of the different purpose of the land, and it's key. It's like, what do we see the land for? And that's all about that framing. I mean, is it for as someone who's going to visit a bothy or as a walker, you're going to have a very different view of the land as the estate owner, and that's not to say that the estate owners are necessarily the kind of this idea of kind of like they're the baddies, the private ownership. That's far too simplistic. But they'll have different things that they want out of it. And the MBA, the Mountain Bothies Association, has negotiated use if they're in places where there's forestry operations, or obviously there's hunting, there's grouse shooting, or but then also the purpose if you're leaving space for nature, for conservation, there's the different purpose. And I think that's the point, is that commonality is important, because that's the key. It's finding those places where you can speak to people on find connections, because there are going to be very many different competing uses. And I think what Leslie was saying, it's about if you don't engage the local community, the residents, the people, that then it's never going to work. It's always just shooting stuff in, and that's been one of the criticisms of this kind of off the grid luxury experiences. It's like this retreat, living in your nice life in a city, and then you go and do this retreat, and it doesn't do anything in the long term for the past, the landscape, the people there. So it's about having those conversations and finding those commonalities.
But it works in the other way. So, for example, at the Ardare Peninsula, it is the most wonderful of ecologies, but no one can go there.
Yeah.
It's actually up for development now, and so those amazing ecological systems are going to be destroyed, because the developer that's coming in is a specialist in brownfield generation, and it's going to go in from where the sand dune systems are at their most fragile and complex. I think the thing as an archaeologist, though, to rewilding, first, what worries me is we have to think about the scale of it. Interestingly, at Drumadoon, it's small scale, it's at the scale of the farm. But is to talk about how these are inhabited and or where the presences of the prehistory, the presences of the 18th century, the presences of the 19th century, are all still there, and they're working landscapes. Some of it's failed working, but these are lived landscapes. It gets a bit more remote with cats examples, but for a reason, right? The fact that she's doing the history of bodies is really, really important. The fact that archaeology is hand in hand with rewilding is really, really important. And Ben, back me up here. This is where I'll say prehistory is really important, because Scott, you're not going to like this, but where prehistory is really important in archaeology, because it is about it's about human and non-human agencies and archaeologies of environments as much as of human inhabitation.
Yeah, you're right. It is. I've been thinking about this recently, actually, Leslie. So this is really prescient. Thanks both of you for letting me listen into this conversation. It's really cool. I think running across both of your projects is a kind of circling around a kind of grasping perhaps for how the cultural and the natural aspects of those landscapes can be brought together in a kind of sustainable way moving forwards. And it's something that prehistorians grapple with a lot. And we tend to get to, sometimes by accident, through working with lots of different types of analyses and lots of different types of data, and the kind of narratives that emerge from those data sets. Sometimes they tend to be more geared towards natural environments, and sometimes they tend to be more geared towards cultural environments, and we try to mediate between the two. But I was really struck. I really like bothies. Kat, has anybody else done history of bothy? I got really interested in bothies a few years ago, thinking about Mesolithic house structures, and just because bothy, they're so radical, like that kind of idea of shared property, and within a society that's absolutely obsessed with property ownership, like that people do that. I think it's nuts. Like they just seem like real radical acts. Again, especially in these big estates where land ownership is absolutely everything, and for people coming from cities who are stressed out about the property values of their house property, to then go and just share a space, is really cool. And I had a look for like ethnographies of bothy users a few years ago, and I didn't find anything good, but maybe I didn't look hard enough. Is there good literature out there, or are you the first person to do this kind of stuff?
No, I mean, there is Rachel Hunt at Edinburgh is who's a works in human geography. She on outdwellings, and it's like fantastic work looking at bothies, but also hutting. And so she's done really interesting work. And there is a book which I just got a letter to do today. I want to say Leslie Riddoch. Yes, Leslie Riddoch, which is more about is again huts and hutting, but it's her time in bothies, and there is that point of they are kind of radical like spaces in this idea of common place and the kind of moral purpose of them, though also at the same time they're actually they're a particular type of share. There's this code that goes with them, which is one of these things about kind of use of landscape, but they can also be quite exclusionary because they're a particular type of culture, because there's like new bothy people. But I think that exactly the idea of like common land, and I've been grappling this with writing about bothy. I visited Pian which has recently been closed because of arguments about overuse, and saying that people burning green wood. But then there's this kind of, it comes back to this argument, the kind of the harden is the end result of like common use always the degradation of the commons, and actually I think actually bothies don't prove that. I think they show something different, that there is this kind of way of, it's not perfect, and I'm not idealizing it, and there's all this kind of critiques, you know, we could like think of it as well, but I think that question exactly, think of like radical kind of ideas of engaging with land. So yeah, definitely if you're Rachel's work is well worth looking up as well on that.
All right. I wonder if they get away with it, kind of taking up that liminal position between like the past, because you know there's something about the fact they're always tumbling down a little bit, and they've got that kind of there's a kind of romantic feel to them. Yeah. And also that kind of liminal space between culture and environment as well. You know, because you're out in the wild, and it's somewhere where the rules that you normally subscribe to don't always apply.
Yeah. Which is why I think the debate about like popularity is interesting, because it's, you know, there've been certain people who've been critiqued for making them popular, which is the bothy Bible, but then you get like all these Guardian articles saying, oh, you know, like the top 15 luxury hideaways, and you're like, well, and then you'll get the, you know, the same article saying, oh well, all these people who went to go and visit it. You're like, well, you're creating this dialogue. So
yeah, I went to, oh sorry, go on, Lesley.
No, it's just I'm gonna plug Kat's work here, because I've seen the book proposal. What's really important is Kat's taking a history approach. So there's the inhabitation as well as the environmental, or it's an environment an inhabitation of the environment through history. She's got that time depth and archival quality to it, but it's the way that Kat's writing it through walking and through movement, and there's a poetic there that is writing history in another way for this topic. It demands that different way of writing history that I think is really important, or something we need to think about, all of us, in how we do our histories and our archaeologies.
Yeah, because I think that's something like, you know, that obviously comes across with your work as well, Lesley. It's like the sense of, you know, frustration about who we were speaking to, and like, but speaking to people in different ways. And, you know, like we both have worked so much with place, and they're like, we're working with place, but we're not setting up projects where people are using the place, so we should be. And I think that's like, it's I mean, so exciting to see what's going to happen, you know, say with like Dig It and those. I want to attend that talk, by the way, so send the link, put the link for the Glasgow talk. But yeah, happy to talk more, Ben, if you're interested in bothies, then.
Oh, I think I'll probably do mostly listening, but yeah, that sounds great.
Hi, George.
Yeah, I would like to ask if there's any research done on bothies in Aberdeenshire. There were thousands of bothies there. Well, maybe not, yeah, I would say thousands. And some of them were still being used in the 1950s. And I, in fact, know a man who didn't live. I went one time to a farm, but I can't remember seeing the bothy. But there's a farm handed over to Aberdeenshire in a place called Mintlow.
Oh.
An archaeologist runs it, and I think there's a bothy there.
Yeah.
And these farm workers lived in these bothies, and you know, they're quite different to the type that you're talking about on the hills and the mountains. That, you know, was nothing like the uses of what the ones had in Aberdeenshire. And it's all shut down now, because there's no longer cattle and sheep and that. It's all rapeseed since we joined the common market. It might now come back that we're out of there, but there's thousands of farms were abandoned, and they're still abandoned. But the bothies were there, and certainly there'll be one or two that can be viewed.
Yes, it's a great question, George. And I mean, some of the buildings that I'm talking about do have similarities to the places, because they also were abandoned as places were cleared, or as like Lesley was saying, with places where, you know, industry or I can't remember the word you use for it, but like it fails for whatever reason, whether that's kind of through forcible movement. The Aberdeenshire ones are really interesting because there are maybe you get slightly bigger groups of young men working and living in those. The bothy ballad, which is the traditional kind of song from those 19th century cottages, comes from them. And I'm not an expert in that, but it's something I've looked at about the collection of those songs of the bothy ballad. There's a bothy ballad archive project at Aberdeen University, I think, and recovering their history. So exactly right, George, that there are similarities and differences, but this kind of what you're talking about is really interesting, because it's that older history which then has become slightly obscured by the modern 20th century meaning of the bothy as the adventure place, which is really important.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, George.
It'll come full circle, Kat, when they start to build the structures at Drumadoon Farm for the regenerative tourism, and there'll be bodies for you to study.
Exactly, I will. There'll be, yeah, I'll come, and then we'll probably be working together.
Is that all right, Naomi?
Everything just froze at exactly that moment. So all I heard was my name. But I was going to say we've come up to 7 o'clock. So if we don't have any more pressing questions, I will thank Lesley and Kat for coming and for such a fascinating, wonderful conversation, and thank all of you for coming and joining us this evening. We do have definitely some more of these events coming up later this term and also next term. I don't have specific dates and times for them yet, so if you keep an eye on our website and our social media, then if you're interested in attending any more of these kinds of events, then there will be an option to book free tickets for those, and also this and all the other events will be up on our YouTube channel to either watch or rewatch as you would like. So yeah, I will let you all go, and again, thank you so much to Lesley and Kat. This was really wonderful and super interesting. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Naomi. And I think go to the other Birkbeck Student Union in Conversations events, because there's something about a conversation when we're all fragmented and on teams and sometimes on campus and sometimes not. There's something really intimate about a conversation, and we need more of it. That's what's going to keep us all together through all of this changing rubbish. So thank you, Naomi, for setting this kind of a series up.
Yeah, definitely, it's been really fantastic, and yeah, just really nice to remember what it's like to talk about new and exciting things.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for coming. Take care, everyone, and have a lovely weekend as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye, George. Bye.
Thank you.